All right, fellow team players out there, this is Local Football Flavor, and we're bringing to you another week where we're talking about our auction league and fantasy football. I got a new haircut, but my team is looking real fresh, and I'm really excited for the week ahead. So let's get down to business for Local Football Flavor.
Welcome to Local Football Flavor, where we talk to local fans to get the real information of what's going on with their team. All right. So yeah, Bob, let's get into it here. We got a week that was in a lot of fun ways here, man.
I gotta say, we were right on a couple things, and we were deadly wrong on a lot of other things. I want to apologize for my take on Patrick Mahomes. That didn't happen. And our guest for a new episode coming out soon, John Roebling, he's a Colts fan.
That came out this morning, Bob, or today at 5. That's out there now.
He'll tell you that we that Colts have something going on with a lot of teams, and I don't know what it is, but Patrick Mahomes definitely should have done better. But it was a weird week, wouldn't you say, Joe?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look overall, it's actually kind of been like a weird season henceforth. So if you look overall, there's a lot of offenses that just aren't scoring right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not. I think it's something like 18 of the offenses in the NFL have less than 20 points a game. Mm-hmm. So I'm certainly seeing a lot of that as I'm breaking down the film of the various teams. So essentially, everyone's scared of getting beat deep and getting beat big. That in combination with the fact that offensive lines in general just are not where they're nowhere near midseason form. We did talk to him about that, about, you need to have practice to be good at offense. And unfortunately, people are using September as practice for their offensive lines, which doesn't really, manifest yourself in a good result.
Yeah, and you can see it with a lot of teams. I mean, particularly, I'm thinking about that Green Bay Tampa Bay game that just happened on Sunday, and that game was really, really not entertaining to watch at all. There was a lot of bad things happening in that game. There was a lot of checking down. I mean, I think at one point in time, Tom Brady was like 7 for 7 for like 73 yards or something like that. And I'm sitting here going like, oh, that's not like, I mean, granted, he has a lot of injuries and stuff, but you can see his fantasy production is not at the point that it was last year, with all the talent that was there. But even with talent, it feels like something's going on in Tampa Bay. Something's going on in Green Bay. Maybe those quarterbacks being veterans can right the ship. Like I said, I'm not totally 100% sold on Aaron Rodgers, even though he is on my fantasy team this year. I did bench him this week, which I said I wouldn't do. But I saw some good footage on TikTok the other day about there's one guy that does like fantasy lineups and stuff. And he was saying that there was a lot of injuries to that Bills defensive backfield. And it was some injuries that I didn't know about, and you didn't know about either, because you started one of the guys and he ended up being hurt and got zero. So when I'm sitting there and I was sitting there going, well, maybe I should start Tua. And then now I see that Tua got banged up in the game.
He got destroyed. He got concussed, but they put him back in the game. I'm
definitely
100% sure it was a violation of protocol.
That something's going to happen to Miami. And like we said at a previous episode about Miami's coach, he's a dangerous fellow for a couple different, fantasy reasons, and just generally, I think, for football, because he's a schemer and he likes to do some weird stuff. And I'm just not I know they're doing well, but I'm just not sold on Miami. I know we thought they were going to do really, really well last week. We thought that game would be a boat race. It wasn't.
I thought it was, for sure.
That Baltimore game was a boat race, though. And so if you had Lamar Jackson, if you had a lot of people, except for Rashad Bateman for some reason, if you had a lot of people from that game, you were probably doing really well. Jamal Williams was surprising, too.
Both of those games kind of did the same template. Starting with Buffalo, looking at that one, they effectively said, we're taking Tyreek Hill out of this game. We're going to see if you can beat us without Tyreek Hill. And they double teamed them virtually every play. And they almost did it the way the Patriots did it when they used to have Revis. They put their number one corner, on the number 2, and then they double teamed the number 1. And that's what they did. And for the most part, it took Waddle out of the game. It certainly took Hill out of the game. And I was just surprised that Hill was able to, or correction, that Tua was able to make things work.
Yeah.
Also, in the second half of that game, Buffalo played like 4 times as many offensive snaps as Miami. It's just that they incinerated at the end, and it is.
And Dorsey will tell you that was really bad.
It was very bad. But what you're hitting on is the overall trend of football, is that the teams are trying to keep you all contained so you can't blow it over the top. Because it's clear what Buffalo showed against Tennessee on Monday Night Football 2 weeks ago, that they can blow anyone over the top. Right. I also do think that, Florida's sun in that humidity certainly wears on a team as it goes on. But Miami didn't really do anything all that impressive. Miami just kind of showed up, but Miami's defense is very good. That part can't be overstated. And of the units out there, I really thought Buffalo's offense would have just destroyed Miami's defense.
Right. But Joe, this is the thing though. In our 8-team auction league, we're doing IDP, and you can see most definitely there is a relationship between the I don't know if you want to call it an inverse relationship between how well offenses are doing and how well defenses are doing in terms of points. Like I think I've had for like the past 3 weeks, I've had at least one person or at least 2 people be over 15 points on my defense. And that's unusual because
yes, it is.
I feel like a lot of times you might get like 9, 10 out of your best defensive player. And on a really good day, you might get like 20 because they'll get a strip sack for, a touchdown or something like that. But there's been a lot of high scoring defensive players over the last several weeks. And it just feels like the way, if you're being a stat watcher and you're not necessarily watching the games and you're watching just the stats, these defensive stats tell you a good picture of what's been happening in the offenses, because what I'm seeing is there's a lot of cornerbacks and safeties that are racking up a lot of cornerbacks actually this year that are racking up a lot of tackles. And usually that tells me that there's a lot of short game passing going on and not necessarily a lot of downfield play, because that's where the safeties will come in at. It's same to go with the linebackers that, there's some linebackers last week that ended up scoring 20. There was like 4 linebackers that scored 20 points last week. And that's really absurd. But that means that there's a lot of, and I think I had a defensive lineman scored like 20, which for me, like that usually doesn't happen. I usually like 6.
Yeah, it's normal. Yeah.
So like when I see stuff like that, that tells me that those players are definitely stifling these offenses in some way. And that's reflective in the way that the games have played out. So if you go to my team real quick, we can take
let's bring it up here. The answer at the end of the day is the offensive lines just aren't where they should be. So I mean that's really the answer. Oh, this is correction. This is I'm in the wrong week here.
Week 1, you need to go.
This is looking for the future and hopes, not the week that was. I apologize for that.
Yeah. So for anybody that doesn't know this, Ginger Rage here, who I faced, our friend Mark Tishko, who by the way is a champion axe thrower. We can't forget that. He was on ESPN just a couple months ago, winning, I think it was the Hatchet, if I'm not mistaken.
It was. He won their version of the British Open.
Kicking all kinds of butt. But he normally is a phenomenal fantasy manager. And he did get smacked really bad by David Montgomery's injury.
Yeah, sure. He beats you if Monty doesn't get hurt.
He really would have beat me this week. But and same with DeAndre Swift. But he's 0-3. He's had a bad shake this season, and usually he's 3-0 or 2-1. But if you look at the defensive distribution down at the bottom, Max Crosby had 20 points. Josh Allen had a normal week at 2. He was supposed to be projected at 6, but for a defensive end, I mean, I'm mad at 2.25, but like last week, I think he was the highest scoring defensive end that I had on my team. Then you look at then you look at the defensive backfield here. Winfield is a safety / cornerback, but 9 points there, 12 for Owens. L'Jarius Sneed had 14. And you look at Tish's side of the ball, his was a little bit more realistic in terms of play, but you can see in the games where those players are scoring like lots of points, like if you go to I have Derrick Henry on my team, right? Derrick Henry scored 25 points. So something else is going on that Crosby was able to get 20. Right.
Well, let's click
I
it
think there
there.
was a sack in there somewhere, but that was wild. But this isn't the only time
It
he's
was
done that.
9 tackles is what it was. 9 tackles and a forced fumble.
Right, and a sack. So like 9 tackles. I mean, Henry's was running the ball. He was crushing it. And if you look at Snead up there for the cornerback, this is like I said when we were talking about Matt Ryan, right? A lot of like, look at that. If you look at those 3 teams, there was a lot of play over the middle or like a lot of short passing routes too. And so a guy like that is going to perform really, really well. And then you look at Marcus Epps, who was, I think, in IDP at least, I think he was towards the top of the rankings. 6 points because Washington couldn't even get their feet off the ground.
So, in fact, actually, it's something that's becoming common is, so many teams have tried to go get the young linebackers. Pittsburgh's an example of that. Tampa did it. Baltimore's done it. And the thing with linebackers, being the middle linebackers, not the edge rushers, is that they take the longest of any defensive position to develop into the game. So knowing that, what a lot of defensive coordinators have done was try to make it easier on them. So this is no longer the time of Ray Lewis and Urlacher, where they are your team captains and they know everything inside and out. It's actually, we're dumbing it down to force everything. That was the Shaq Leonard comparison that Roebling told us about earlier today. And that if you're trying to force everything to the linebackers, it means you're playing more shells over the top. And there's very few times in the game on last weekend with the Colts and Chiefs that the Colts didn't have 2 over the top, but almost every single time that they were able to exploit it, Kelsey got a big play. So it's something that's becoming common with football. And to me, it's all because the offensive lines are so bad. Pass rushers are wreaking havoc on this league, and there's just not time to put it downfield. And that's the end of the day reason why these linebackers are taking off so much. I mean,
and
it's life.
I mean, you're absolutely right about it. Like with Camus Gruger Hill here, I had him last year, and he was, when Christian Kirksey went down, I had both of them. I picked him up. I think I dropped him this week, or I was hoping to drop him for somebody else. You just when you run an IDP league, you cannot let your linebacker be 3 points. I had to play him because Micah Parsons was almost not going to play. But those 3 points made the difference this week because, like we said, Tish had 2 injuries happen with Swift.
The difference is Montgomery got hurt in the first drive.
Montgomery
doesn't get hit in the first drive, you lose.
If you look at Herbert's stats, Khalil Herbert's stats, like he had the game that everybody was thinking. And that's why when we came out last week to say, project forward and project ahead, I thought I was going to lose really, really bad. And I should have, because the stats that Herbert had, Montgomery should have had.
Yeah.
And that was going to be the end of the night for me. But if you can do me a favor, if you can go to, because many people might not know our scoring here, if you can go to the player pool and then just sort it. I just want to see the quarterback rankings after the first couple of weeks. So if you can sort by all quarterbacks and then sort it by points.
Sure can. So fantasy points produced. I want to point out that I got number 3 there.
Right.
He's probably going to Lamar Jackson's league MVP at this point. Not just in fantasy, but in real life. That Baltimore has no other offense than him.
I still stand by what I said a couple weeks ago when he had his first big game. I still stand by it that this is a perfect opportunity for you to try to fleece every other owner or one other owner in your league who has a top-tier running back, top-tier wide receiver, and is struggling at quarterback, if they don't have one of these top quarterbacks,
Oh, really? You can look at that tier gap. I mean, that's 20 points from 1 to 2, and then another 20 points from 3 to 4.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge, right? And when we're looking at everybody else below it, you know, you might not have thought you'd see Jared Goff in there, and you probably didn't think you'd see Tua or Wentz in there, but Tua was carried by.
So game of his life, he puts up 36, then he returns right back to the 11 and 14
right,
territory.
and that's kind of what
I'll tell you this: don't get on the Tua Express.
But as you look at the quarterbacks that are not in that top category, there, I'm surprised to see Jacoby
Brissett doing there.
I'm surprised to see him at the same point that Kirk Cousins is. I'm surprised to see Geno Smith at the same point. Go ahead down a little bit more. With Zach Wilson coming back, I don't know if I should be fading New York Jets players or not. I'm a little concerned.
Absolutely should. Guy can't handle pressure. He's about to play the Steelers.
Matt Stafford down here at 33 points is definitely, if your league is a 2-quarterback league, I'd definitely try to shop for him if you could pull that off. But like I said about Lamar Jackson, you said that there's such a big disparity, and there is. But when I think about buy low candidates and sell high guys, you got to ask yourself, and this is with any player, this is a really nice run that Lamar is having. He's like eclipsing a really crazy total with just a couple weeks into the season, right? Just with 3 weeks in a season, he has 100 points. Statistically speaking, there's no reason to say that he can't do it, but
it would put him on pace for like Jerry Rice of 85 type.
But that would be, I mean, that it feels like a statistical anomaly. And the reason I say to trade him is because if you go to the running backs and wide receivers, if you just go in our league to the running backs and wide receivers, so we can give everybody kind of just a look at how everything's shaking down. You know, you could. It's crazy that Khalil Herbert is at 51 points right now because he had like that monster game.
He had 32 last week.
But if you're sitting here, and I mean, I'm looking at some of these guys, and if I go a little bit down the page here, you know,
Fournette's not doing anything.
Derrick Henry, Fournette, Javonte Williams, Najee Harris. You know, I'm sitting here looking at these guys and looking at potential breakouts moving forward with Breece Hall. You know, Dalvin Cook hasn't banged up shoulder. Who knows what's going on with James Conner? If you are sitting on Lamar Jackson and your team needs 1, 2, or 3 pieces to take it to the next level,
go get him.
I would consider it because go to Mr. Lowe's team. Mr. Lowe, I played him last week. He has Lamar Jackson, and he lost again this week.
He lost dirty this week.
He's 0-3. He faced the owner.
Yeah, he lost by less than a point.
He faced the owner that had Saquon Barkley. And I'm looking here, and I've been trying to weasel my way into to make a trade for him. But if I'm looking at him,
he needs a receiver.
And if I have Joe Burrow, right, who's going to take me to the next level? Well, Javonte Williams has not been performing. DJ Moore has not been performing. Brandon Cooks has not been performing. Josh Jacobs has been okay-ish. And if you go down to his bench, you know, he has a group of guys. He should be starting Christian Kirk. He should be starting James Robinson, and he's not.
Definitely should be starting Kirk.
But I'm looking at that team, and I'm saying, okay, if I can trade Lamar Jackson for Devontae Adams and somebody else, or for Derrick Henry and somebody else, I really would think about taking that all day. The value is just, I mean, historically speaking, he has to come back down to earth.
I would assume so. I would certainly assume so.
Because if you go to him, if you click on him, is there a way to see like his past season statistical performances?
All right. So
Because I feel like in years past, he's also had like crazy games.
Mm-hmm. So here is his history, right? So the bottom number is where we're at now.
Yeah, go to the 2020 year. The 2020 year is I don't know
So
if
his
you can get
2020
like
year for passing, he only ended up with 2,700 yard or 2,700. Right now,
he's only
he's
2,000 away from that.
yeah, with 14 games to go. So he's certainly on pace to crush it. His completions per yard or per attempt rather are over a yard higher. He threw 26 touchdowns that year. He's already thrown 10 this year. You're not going to average 3.3 touchdowns a game. You're just not going to do that.
Yeah, and like when I look at him, you know, like we talked about the other day.
So in that regard, it's going to be much higher because you also don't average.
Running back. He's a number one running back, and he has the stats of like a number, 15, 16 quarterback. When you put that all into one player, it feels really good.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I mean, obviously he's having his best passing year of his life. But we will see. We'll see how well it progresses. The thing with Baltimore is when we look at his game log and who they've actually played. New England is.
Can you look at the game log for 2020? Go back and look at the game log for 2020 because that statistically was his best season.
Okay, so the game log for 2020. Yep, passing here in center, rushing down the side here. It's going up. So this was week 1. This is week 17. You see his rushing every game, with the exception of 2. He's over 50 yards of rushing. We said at the time that was not sustainable, but he did it. That's how he got to the 1,000 yards rushing. But the trade-off for that is there's a whole bunch of games where he only has 1 touchdown thrown. And this is the year where they went 12-4.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up on that great run, and all they did was score points. So the thing with Baltimore, and you see all of his passing, he didn't have a single 300-yard game the whole season.
Mm-hmm. Now go to this year.
Now we go to this season. Passing wise, he's had 1 300-yard game. That was the loss to Miami, which baffling how they lost that game by themselves. Their Harbaugh lost that game for them.
Yeah.
But if we look at it, Miami's a real defense. New England doesn't really have – they're just not good defense. There's no way to say that about New England here. And as we're looking at the Jets, I don't really think they're going to be anything either, but they held them to 56% completion percentage and only 17 yards. They shut down his running ability.
Mm-hmm.
New England flat out doesn't have the speed to be able to do that. So,
but you take away in any league, you take away that 10 points, he still had 30 points, but realistically, you would want to project 2.5 touchdowns for him in a given week passing.
I'm going to assume that the 4 touchdowns passed he did last week will be his career high.
Yeah, and I just don't like he's been on a tear. Now, I'm not saying if you want to keep him, by all means, if you're an owner of Lamar Jackson, keep him. But it just feels like now is the highest value. And I'll go on record saying that, now is the highest value that he's going to be at, regardless of what he does next week.
The counterbalance argument to that is that Baltimore literally has no other option. They cannot. They have no running backs on their team whatsoever. No, they've used to be able to run the ball with their backs.
Not while he's been there.
No, that's not true. When Dobbins was healthy 2 years ago, that they had good backs.
Now he's healthy again, supposedly.
Yeah, I don't really think he is, though. I think they just needed him back based on how bad that they were. So I want to bring up my game from last week because Two reasons. A, it kind of shows that the ESPN projections are not always right. When my opponent is off by nearly 50 points from what he was projected to do without any real rhyme
He
or
had two
reason.
big injuries, though. Mixon and Cook both got injured in those games.
And Cook got injured, so put up 12 points. I don't get how he did that. But, this is just the general of sometimes things. Eckler got cut out of the game because of game script. And I look at this is a fun fact that I saw over the weekend. For the individual top 10 scoring receivers last year, or last week rather, only 2 of them were in a game that they won. And the inverse is true for running backs. Of the top 10 running backs, 8 of them won and only 2 of them lost. Just an interesting fact to throw out there.
So you're saying for the higher scoring running backs that they won the game, like
they all won their actual games in real life.
They won their games in real life.
That's like, really dude, Chicago won. Like I think that's actually a telling stat looking at it forward. But the guy I wanted to actually talk about in today's session is Waller, because he's kind of the disappointment from everything I've seen so far. He's not getting the volume he got nearly at all last year. I know Davante Adams is there, but I really am blaming the coach more than the player on this one. I don't like Chase McDaniels. I never really have. So I just don't understand what they're doing with him.
Well, if you look at the Raiders as a whole, and you go, I don't know who owns Carr. You can look it up. If you look at the Raiders as a whole offensively, I know Renfro has been hurt.
He got hurt the last play of the game.
Last week, not this past week, but the week before that, Davante Adams only had 2 receptions. They have been really not that great. And, one of the games we pointed out as a game to watch out for last week was Tennessee and the Raiders. Now, you had the Raiders winning that game, thankfully for your bets and stuff.
No, I had Tennessee winning that game. I hit that bet. Yeah. Money line, baby.
And I pointed out that this was shaping up to be one of those 30-point Derrick Henry weeks, and it almost was. There's a lot of things going on with a lot of different teams that make me a little bit concerned to own players from those teams. I don't want to give up on the Raiders just yet, but they don't. Whatever's happening there, and you mentioned Chase McDaniel, whatever's happening there, something is wicked there. I don't really want to own Davante Adams anymore, because I really don't know why he's not performing in the way he's performing. And you own Davante Adams, so you can click on him there. 14 points is respectable in a PPR league for him.
So,
but how do you go from 10 receptions to 2 to 5, and it's not like the defense has got any better?
No, he played Arizona, which is one of the worst pass defenses in the league. It's and that's a game that they lost, by the way. They went to overtime against Arizona. You would like to have some more points to prevent that, obviously. So there's a couple of teams like that. And I ask you this just as a broad question. Seattle's obviously a team that I don't want to touch. I don't want to touch anyone in Denver. I would way rather have any offensive player on Detroit than any of those 5 teams. If someone right now would have offered me before he got hurt, but St. Brown for Adams, I mean, I'd really consider it. I definitely would do it for Waller, but I would consider it for Adams. I might need some extra to push it over.
I mean, if you look at what Adams is doing, you cannot having a touchdown a game, as probably the ESPN thing blurb down here says, having a touchdown a game is not a sustainable over the length of a season. And if this is, outside of that first game, we only have a 3-game sample size here, but you're looking at 24 points, right? Then you're looking at 3 points, and then you're looking at 8 points. Now, to me, that screams streaky, right?
Oh yeah.
Where we've seen like guys like Devontae Parker put up a big game and then fall down. Justin Jefferson did it, and I'm going to put this to you. Justin Jefferson did that week 1, and the past 2 weeks he's done pretty much nothing. So I'm going to ask you this: over the entirety of the season here, who do you think rights the ship? Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, and who do you think spirals down? Because I mean, a lot of the wide receivers put up really good numbers in the first 1, 2, 3 games here.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those numbers aren't sustainable. I mean, from a fantasy perspective, you want to have touchdowns, you want to have all that. But usually those top tier wide receivers only get between like 8 to 10 touchdowns, if that.
Yeah, because it gets spread around ultimately.
And it's the yardage and receptions that you want. You want them to have like, 70 receptions, 1,200 yards, and like 7 touchdowns is like good.
Certainly an above average season. Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I'm more confident in Jefferson than I am in Adams.
Mm-hmm.
2 main reasons there. First is that Jefferson is, I believe, at this point in the game, more talented. I think that Jefferson's just better. I know Jefferson has a better quarterback throwing him the ball. So that's the big tiebreaker. Cousins is a tier above Carr, for sure. And overall, as kind of what you're hitting on there, there's something about the culture of the Raiders that just always seems a little bit off.
Right.
And you think about last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, Raiders time takes forever because they have so much drama in their lives. But turning over all those coaches, what they went with Antonio Brown for an offseason, there's always something that's negative with them, and they're always chasing the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're also have this caveat to them. Minnesota's got a defense that can put teams out and win without Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the Raiders having a way of winning without throwing the ball through Adams. Jacobs is basically done from what I can see in all intents and purposes. He's not hitting the holes hard at all. That being said, to caveat my own self and maybe even contradict myself, a lot of the elite running backs in the NFL that did not do anything in preseason or really in training camp, week 3 was their comeback on week. Like, it took them 2 weeks to get going. You saw it with Saquon, saw it with Henry. You definitely saw it with Chubb. It took them a minute to get ready. Part of this is the offensive line.
Didn't take that for Saquon. Saquon did well week 1.
You're all right, but he did dominate in week 3. So that being said, though,
yeah, it's weird because you look at I'm going to go back to what you said about Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins. From a fantasy perspective, they're the same quarterback.
Yes.
The reason I say that
not
is
from a winning perspective.
My Yahoo league, I have both of them, and so far Derek Carr has put up more points than Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins played on Monday night.
Yeah.
As the season goes on, Mac Hollins was the guy in Oakland this past week, but it's just really, really concerning to me. And I mean, it could very well be that defenses are taking Adams out of the game. Defenses are taking Jefferson out of the game. And these quarterbacks are finding other ways to make plays. But from a fantasy point of view here is that when you're thinking about your studs and you're thinking about your starters and you're thinking about guys that you would never bench because of their upward potential,
I don't think you bench either of them, quite frankly. I didn't even bench CeeDee Lamb.
You can't bench either of them, but it's concerning when you have to roll someone out there that is not looking like the preferred option during some weeks.
Yeah, that's the part.
More so Devontae Adams than Jefferson. More so Devontae Adams.
Yeah, so Jefferson doesn't have that problem nearly as much as Adams. Because I never worry about Minnesota forgetting that he exists. I do worry that Chase McDaniels wants to be known as the smartest person on planet Earth and saying I can do it with a hand behind my back. And to me, that is just poor. That's arrogance in a nutshell. So I actually feel more confident in CeeDee Lamb with the whole Cooper Rush experience than I do with Devontae Adams right now. Again, you can't play Arizona and only get 7 targets. It just doesn't work. To me, that's the thing is the target share normally is relatively consistent. Like Chase has up and down weeks, but when Chase has an up week, it has a potential being a 40-point week.
Same
So
with Higgins too.
that's the whole Cincinnati game. Yeah,
they're running in stride, and I think over the last couple of years that they've been playing together in the games that they play together, I think Higgins has more targets than Chase, just because Chase is double covered a lot of times, and Higgins, and just respectfully, that's gonna happen. But to my point earlier too, Joe, is that even though I'm unsure of Devontae Adams, that potential to succeed theoretically is still there, and that's why I brought him up as one of the players that you could definitely get in a package for Lamar Jackson. People that own Devontae Adams are sick of Devontae Adams so far this year. They're sick of the Raiders. They're sick of everything that's going on over there. They don't want to watch 4:00 games anymore, right? It's just like you can probably get Devontae Adams and at least 2 other guys from a person for Lamar Jackson right now. That's how done people are with Devontae Adams.
And potentially even CeeDee Lamb if you can sell the Cooper Rush story.
So he's been targeted a lot with Cooper Rush. So I mean, people thought.
Oh, I'm definitely not getting rid of CD. I am dramatically happy with him, but I would also look at that in that capacity that of the top tier ones, no one's considering moving Jefferson or Chase or obviously Cooper Kupp. Those ones obviously aren't going anywhere, but Adams
neither is Diggs.
No, neither is Diggs at all. No, but Adams now is the one that's there.
Lamb, Adams, Evans, those second round guys that you took, they're definitely considered, and a lot of people were probably really chomping at the bit to trade them straight up for like Amon-Ra St. Brown as well, because he's being used more, and you can see that he's being used more. And granted, he's a little banged up from this past week, and Swift is a little banged up too. But I'm not worried if the Detroit Lions are going to win games this year. But statistically, if Amon-Ra St. Brown can put up 8 receptions, 80 yards, and a touchdown every other week, or 8 receptions, 120 yards, I mean, that's good. And I feel like I'm dogging Adams a lot because he had a really good week, and he didn't really good week 1, and 14 is I guess respectable. But for me, he's definitely a buy low guy because I'm sick of him, really. I mean, I don't want my elite premier wide receiver to get 2 points and only be looked at twice in a game.
No, and that's totally fair. And as we're talking about the buy low guys, we have one right here in our home city that a lot of people are down on in Najee. So I think that we should spend a minute there going over the Najee experience and talking it out.
Well, I mean, the line's awful. Mitch Trubisky, I mean, I know I spoke about Mitch Trubisky at the beginning of the year saying that he's the guy right now. You go out and pay him. He's had some good games in the past. He's had some good weeks in the past. Steelers fans, Matt Canada is bad as an offensive coordinator.
Yes.
I just think about that. I just think about all kinds of things that they're doing wrong as an armchair quarterback. I don't think I could ever be an offensive coordinator, but I'm just looking at what those games are so infuriating to me. And when your game plan is terrible, you're going to suffer. But when I'm looking at Najee, it's the same. It's the Devontae Adams experience here, and the same with Austin Eckler this year too, is they're getting buoyed up in a lot of respect by games where they can have a lot of receptions. And Najee, I feel like he could put together a couple 100-yard games this year, but Canada has to go, and because
I completely agree with that. So the point of promise for Najee people, And then this is from the, as I call it, statistical scouting, is that his average per carry has gone up from 2.3 to then 3.3 and now 3.7. Cleveland's obviously a very good run defense and still get 3.7. The watching the Steelers and breaking them down, when they are at their best, is drives that they are using Najee a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And what is infuriating, what you're getting at here, Bob, is if we've known that for 3 weeks now, why is he not the focal point? Why is it still trying to force the ball only to the sidelines and never to the middle of the field? And it reminds me of 2 facts about Canada, the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
The first one being that Ben, obviously Hall of Fame quarterback, he only listened to what he wanted to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
He explicitly said that Canada calls the plays for the first 3 quarters. I call them in the 4th quarter. And when we do the no huddle, and our offense basically did nothing for the first 3 quarters all year last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ben made things happen in the 4th quarter. Now,
Mm-hmm.
is that the arrogance of Ben? Maybe, but it's also a fact that you can't deny. And the other portion of the Canada experience is that it has now been released that the only reason they brought Matt Canada back last year was because they wanted Ben to retire and they didn't have the ability. They didn't want to fire him himself. So they figured by hiring someone Ben hates, he wouldn't come back, which is the worst reason to hire someone.
That's an interesting reason. I want to point this out too, because I've really been thinking over the last couple of weeks. When we were talking about defenses,
Mhm.
and when we were talking about target share in like an offense, I was looking here over last week's number of targets that players have had.
Mhm.
Marquise Brown had 17, which is outrageous.
Yes, it is.
Chris Olave and Russell Gage had 13. Devonta Smith and CeeDee Lamb and DK Metcalf had 12. Amari Cooper had 11, and that's tied with Zay Jones, Deontay Johnson, and Tyler Lockett. The reason I bring those, the only one
2 Seattle receivers on that list.
And I could be mistaken in this, but I think only one of those players eclipsed 100 yards.
Yeah, it's because we live in a check down world.
So, and Marquise Brown caught like 14 balls. So like he had like 140 yards, 14 balls or something like that. Is insane. But and I look at that and I look at especially look at Gage, Olave, CeeDee Lamb, the 2 Seattle wide receivers, Cooper and Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And all those quarterbacks are checking down, like you said, every single one of them. And Deontay Johnson, I don't know what his final stat line was at all.
I can get that for you. I also have him.
Was it like 70 yards, 8 receptions or something like that?
Deontay ended last game 8 catches, 80 yards.
Okay.
Yeah,
8 catches,
11
yards.
targets.
So 16 total points, which is higher than Devontae. If it's me and I'm a fantasy owner here, I am looking for bad quarterbacks, and if I'm in a PPR league, I'm looking for guys that are these check down guys, and I am doing my best to try to acquire some of those because the volume is there, and we've been speaking for weeks about volume. You can't say for without a shadow of a doubt if guys are going to get touchdowns, but like, and this goes to say Rashad Bateman, for example. He had last week where he burned somebody for like a 60-yard touchdown. This week he started him. Yeah. He got 5 points, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I think about these players, Chris Samuel comes to mind as well. He's getting targets. He's getting volume. He's getting his minimum so far has been 7 points a game. Mm-hmm. And so his upside is there. He has a huge amount of upside. Some of these guys that I mentioned, their upside is limited by the offense that they're in. But DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, I mean, they seem to go tit for tat a lot of times where one has a good game, one has the other game. I really think that when you look at those teams that have bad quarterbacks, that it might not be a bad idea to get some of their volume guys because
Like Tyreek Hill.
I mean, it's something to say about that system. But going back to the reason I brought that up with Deontay Johnson there is that I don't know how many targets Chase Claypool had or any of those other wide receivers, but it just feels like if they gave the ball to Najee Moore and threw the ball to Najee Moore, that better plays would happen.
Well, the number one thing with the Steelers is they need to open up, and this is true for this actually the same problem around the league. When you look at a heat map, most teams are only working really in 3 boxes. It's specific for their team. So if you basically draw the field into a 9 square like a telephone, and your first square is 8 yards up, and then your next one is 20 yards up, and then everything past that. Most teams operate only in 3 boxes. And that's all. But when teams are winning and teams are effective, and this is one of the reasons I love Seamus Jameis, there's no real consistency. It can go anywhere at any point, and we'll chuck it. That's how Rodgers won. That's how Rodgers wins. He can put the ball anywhere, and he's not afraid to put it anywhere. But most coordinators don't trust their people.
Yeah, and that leads to a lot of infuriating owners because, 1 week Romeo Dubes will do well, and then the next week Alan Lazard will do well. They never it's the same thing what we were saying about Patrick Mahomes is he always ends up throwing it to some rando guy, and he did it again this past week for a touchdown. You're like, who is that guy? What happened?
Well, speaking of Kansas City, because I just, like I said, I just broke down their last game here against the Colts. I can tell you with almost certainty when we're having these talks here in week 8, week 9, Clyde Edwards-Helaire will end up with more targets than he does rushes. He is going to lose all of his rushing carries to Pekeko, or however you say his name.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That guy hits the hole hard. He hits it correctly. There's 3 separate plays where Helaire outruns the hole and then ran backwards and get it back. So this is not making this up. His stat line: 7 carries, 0 yards, long of 4, and a touchdown.
Yeah.
Like it was crazy. So Helaire is probably going to end up being like a slot type, but not as talented as the other 2 that I think of off the top of my head that are better. He's not as good as Pollard, nor is he as good as the one in Jacksonville. And that's really going to be the direction of Helaire. I can pretty much tell you he's going to be a first-round bust if he hasn't already been designated as that.
I think a lot of people have already put him in that category, but when we're talking fantasy, though,
no, I mean he's a fantasy bust as a first-round draft pick.
Yeah, and as we talk about busts, when you look at this past year of players that were drafted in the first round, other than Cooper Kupp, none of them have been worth owning. Like we're battling back and forth, and over these past 3 weeks, I think you could say that it's been pretty much a waste. And so I'm curious as going forward. Like we said, Jefferson looks like he's in a situation to right the ship. Henry could be on the bend to get back. I'm really curious to see how a lot of the first round talent and second round talent that we were drafting, because it is to say.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Swift's been a disappointment. He just got hurt. I think Swift is.
But that's a disappointment.
So if we're, I guess in terms of total value, I think if we're looking at what that first 15 or so was that people are looking at, obviously Kupp is the least disappointing.
Saquon.
But of the tier that's coming next, that I have the most confidence in that they will get there, it's got to be Jefferson, Jones, and Chase. And at the end of the day, they have the same 3 things in common, or the same thing in common. They all volume guys. The Chase gets volume because when it comes down to it, if Burrows needs to win a game, it goes to Chase. There's no doubt that he is most comfortable with him. And also, both Jefferson and Chase have the ability of they get volume, but they don't need it because they actually go downfield to catch the ball.
Absolutely.
That's the difference of owning him versus a Renfro. Renfro would get like 11 targets a game, but they're all for 8 yards. So there is value in getting the guy who only gets 6 to 8 targets, but when he catches it, it's a 20-yard catch. There's
Right.
certainly
Yeah.
value in that.
Like I was saying, I don't want to load my team up with the guys that are just, on really crappy teams and getting volume. But I would consider it if I have a top tier talent like Lamar, or a guy that I would consider and be like, hey, I think I want to trade him. Who do I want back? What do I want to get back? Because you can predict volume usually.
Mm-hmm. Target share tends to stay the same.
So you look at it and you're like, okay, on a week to week basis, who am I looking at? What's going to happen here? I think by the end of the year, and we can just take our auction link as an example, Lamar is probably going to finish as the QB1. At lowest, probably QB3, barring an injury.
Yeah.
And when you think about guys that can potentially outproduce him at other positions, you might have Derrick Henry, you might have if Montgomery.
But there is something to say being 40% ahead of the fourth place guy. Like that's like Kelsey level stuff.
It is. It's like a Mark Andrews, Kelsey level thing in and of itself, and people will overdraft guys because of that.
But Lamar didn't get overdrafted in most places. He was around a 5th rounder.
No, I'm saying in regular leagues.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were taking him, depending on when you drafted in the summer, some people were taking him relatively high on the same level as maybe a round or two later than Kelsey. But when I think about that value there, you could trade, because the guy's probably not going to want to keep his quarterback that he had. And maybe it's Joe Burrow, maybe it's Carson Wentz, maybe it's somebody else. Trade for him, trade for that. I mean, there's so much potential in a fantasy season. I really don't like leagues where they don't want trading to happen, because that's an important piece of the puzzle here.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely, I've lost leagues based on my first round pick, because one year I had Adrian Peterson, and that was the year that he had a lot of legal trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But I've lost leagues because I was particularly reliant on a specific strategy, and I took a guy that fit that strategy, but then my other players, once that guy went down, didn't. So I had to start trading away. So I look at trades a lot over the course of the season. And I know a lot of guys on TikTok, they go, would you rather trade so-and-so for so-and-so, or so-and-so for so-and-so? Looking at volume is super helpful. Looking at, what that schedule looks like, and looking at what their coaches have done for game scripts so far. Like, I'm not going to go after a guy from Miami this year, because that is an influx situation. I'm not going to target necessarily some guys from Chicago, even though they're having down years. Like, I don't want them. I really don't want them.
You don't want any of Chicago's passers, because he does throw enough passes a game. Like I said, in Miami, you want Gesicki, Waddle, or Hill, and that's it.
And I don't even want Gesicki either, because he got like one target, yesterday or on Sunday.
Well, they weren't on the field very much. That's the things that are concerning to me. And if you want as an overall, what I use as my default is which offenses are averaging the most plays. At the end of the day, those are the ones that by default give you the most chance of getting points, because they're out there more. Mm-hmm. And teams like Seattle, which is how I got amazed that both Seattle receivers were on there. Seattle is running the least amount of plays in NFL history. They're on the pace for. Denver isn't too far behind it. And do you want to be a part of a team that's just basically here to kill the clock and keep it moving? Because that's what the Colts did yesterday. And the Chiefs bought into it, which amazed me. The second half, both of those teams only had 3 drives in the whole second half. Your average game is about 7 to 9 drives a half. They had 3. Like, just think about that. All that is a lot of 4 yards and 3-yard runs and a lot of 7-yard down and outs.
Yeah.
That was the entire game. Not exactly the funnest thing to watch.
Though. That's reflected in those stats, is that, I also am Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton, I think, put up like 20 points or something like that. But that was not a fun game to watch. And if you're a fantasy person who likes to watch your players, like, I don't really want to own anybody from Denver or San Francisco or Chicago, anything like that. I don't really want to own them because it's not a fun game to watch. It's not really
To
intriguing
me,
from
the two
any
funnest
perspective.
watches are Washington and Detroit because they had the capability to score. They also, especially in Washington's case, had the capability of
Mhm.
throwing a lot of pick sixes, and neither one of them have a defense.
Yeah.
I would load up any single game against Washington because your players aren't going to come off the gas because Wentz will score. He'll throw some picks, and which will give you good field position.
It makes me really, really, really excited to watch those owners that have Saquon Barkley playing Washington twice a year here. Like, I mean, like, I know
That's
that
why I'm loving having Devontae Smith, man. That whole division I'm loving
I
because
mean, Devonta Smith looked really good. I mean,
Mhm.
the Eagles as a whole look really good.
Eagles are the best team in the NFC.
I mean, it could very well easily be by the end of the year if you account for rushing statistics that Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson would be 1-2.
I bet
Um,
they are.
followed by probably
Allen.
Mahomes and Herbert and Allen. Um, those three will probably be round out your top five. And I could foreseeably, I could see that being the top five probably for like the next 2 years. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
unless something else crazy happens.
and it's early in the year, but Kansas City's in trouble. Kansas City had 9 plays inside the opponent's 5-yard line, so first and goal or less from 5 yards out, and they
Mhm.
only got 1 touchdown out of it. So
Yeah, I mean,
their offense a little concerning right now.
It's not this. It's not the same team without Tyreek Hill. We touched on that when we were talking to John, our Colts fan. Definitely not the same team there. But when you want to look for players to target, maybe in a trade or anything like that, um, you might. If you really want a tight end, I mean, you're going to pay a premium for Andrews and Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
But like you mentioned Waller before, the Raiders are. It's a weird situation there, but like I said, Waller, a tight end at 11 points is much easier to stomach in a PPR than your top wide receiver getting 14 points.
Oh yeah. No fight about that.
It's very easy to stomach that. But I noticed that we're running out of time. So, what do you think your biggest takeaway fantasy wise is from this past week? And what do you think? What are you looking forward to upcoming for this week?
So I think the biggest thing for me is that overall the NFL isn't scoring any points right now. And moving forward, as the offensive lines gel across the country, I'm excited for that. I'm actually personally leaning more towards the teams that are better at running the ball at this point and taking their passing games, because typically the way that NFL offensive lines coalesce
Mm-hmm.
is they coalesce first through the running game.
Mm-hmm.
So in a weird way, I'm leaning on the AFC South that everyone has been hating on because the Colts and Tennessee both know how to run the ball. Atlanta knows how to run the ball. I'm actually liking the Giants' prospects of this fact that I'm for the first time in forever open that Daniel Jones might not be the problem. Like it's getting crazy. I'm open to that idea. I'm not sold yet, but I'm open to it. I'm not open to Dallas. They can't run the ball to save their lives. That's mostly Zeke. But I'm very open to Philly, and I think that the whole Buffalo thing will be a mirage. So I think at the end of the day that those are the group of teams that can run the ball, and you see they're scattered across it in league
Mm-hmm.
perception. Buffalo Philly being the best teams ever. People are way down on
So
Tennessee and the Colts.
you're saying if you're struggling right now, you may be 1-2, 3 or 0-3. Try to go trade for or target guys on those teams or on primarily running based teams
Mm-hmm.
because the volume will be there. You're not so worried about that, and trade away guys on streaky teams. I mean, that's common sense,
Yeah, I would. Yeah, and that also includes Denver and Chicago, because those lines are starting to come together because they are starting to run the ball well. And I know Chicago is like, oh, they're going to have the first pick in the draft, and they very well might. Same with Atlanta, but and Cleveland as well in that matter. Cleveland's running the ball very well. I wouldn't be surprised if that core group is in the top tier when we sit down here around week 6 or so. And it's not very complicated. If your quarterback has more time, your receiving cores will get more yards as a
Mhm.
general rule. So I'm avoiding the teams that can't run the ball, is the long story short. And that, to go to your entire point, goes back to why I don't want Baltimore, because the only person who's running the ball out of Baltimore is Jackson, and it's mostly on scrambles. I would try to avoid the Baltimores of the world like crazy. Houston obviously is in that list. Just teams that are not able to control the flow of the game is who I want to avoid and get out of there. And there's some elite talents on there that you like, whoa, you don't want to touch them? Nah, I don't want anything to do with Carolina. Moore is getting incinerated because they can't run the ball. I don't want McCaffrey either. So I guess that's just kind of my overall assumption of where I think it'll be 3 to 4 weeks from now. It'll be the teams that are running the ball well will really take off. And some teams that we thought were going to be great, like the Raiders, who can't run the ball to save their lives, are going to fall at the face of the earth.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. So, for all the team players out there, thanks for joining us today. We really want to hear your thoughts and opinions. Share with us your fantasy teams, ask us questions, interact with us. That's the best way to get to know us. We might share some bad takes sometimes. We might share some really good takes sometimes.
Yeah.
But Joe and I, we've been watching football play. He's played football. I've watched it. Been in fantasy since like 1997. So it's been crazy. This has got to be one of the years where it doesn't feel normal. It feels it really feels chaotic. Also for anybody out there, if you wanted to check out, I know we talk up the Jags a lot on our show. Check out Interjag. He's a Jaguars fan. He has his own YouTube. He's also on Twitter. Hopefully we can get him on the show sometime soon. And I was recently talking to him again. Man, owning Jaguars players, I'd never thought that I would say.
Christian Kirk has been the steal of my drafts, man. And I am working on trying to get him on my team right now in our league.
That's a team that's running the ball, though. They're doing good running the ball. And it's opening up the passing game, and Trevor Lawrence looks actually good. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen there.
Yeah. Like I said, Christian Kirk looks like the steal, man. I'm telling you.
And I still don't like Aaron Rodgers. So,
and that being said, the two of the teams that aren't running the ball that I just talked up is Washington. That's one of those teams that they don't run the ball well, and their mirage probably will fall apart as a result of that. Because also, Wentz going to break. So is Ryan.
I still think for a couple weeks he'll be all right.
Yeah, he'll be all right for a couple weeks. He won't be all right in November. But nonetheless, guys, thank you all for being there. Be a team player and click like and subscribe.